All right, friends, welcome back to the Applied Leadership Podcast. My name is Blaine Smith, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friend and business partner, Brandon Young. And today we're going to talk about something that I was surprised to realize that we hadn't really talked about much in a public forum up to now, which is, in general, remote work versus in-person work and everything that goes along with that. And this wasn't a question that was submitted. It was just sort of a thought that I was having earlier today. And I was reflecting on something that one of our favorite authors, Seth Godin, often talks about. And I don't know him or understand his nuanced position on this. I'll just preface by saying that. But he really is a strong advocate for remote work and really extols the values of that and how we can work with people from all over the world. We can get so many things done asynchronously. We can use all these amazing technological tools to, get the right people on the team, do the best possible work without all of the restrictions that come along with people needing to move to big cities or pay high rents or live in an office or be Americans or any of those things. Mm-hmm. And, in many ways, I'm very aligned with that. You and I have both benefited greatly from the value of remote work, which we can talk in more detail about, going back a long way, by the way.
Right.
And yet I can't help but feel like that's not really a complete answer to that question. Like, I'm feeling more and more as I work in our business, but also as I interface with other businesses, that little bit of something that seems to be missing in a lot of places, whether it's customer service or collaboration or you name it. There is something special about being in the same room, sharing the same space and getting to know each other in all of those kind of informal ways. And that's about as far as I got. So I don't really know exactly where I stand on this. I'd love to just spend 30 minutes talking about it with you, because I know you have some thoughts on it. Maybe we can just think out loud for a little while. But I know a lot of people are wrestling with this right now, and there's clearly no kind of capital R right answer to this. But I do think we're going to continue to wrestle with it for the foreseeable future. So let's see what we can get on the table here, maybe.
Yeah. I think connection matters very clearly, and I think that's really what it comes down to, is that it does afford us the chance to connect. It affords us a chance to collaborate. It affords us the chance to do things asynchronously. All of that, I agree, and we have benefited greatly from that, which I think we can probably share a little bit of our experience with that in a moment here. But I would say that there is something that is missed with the lack of embodied connection. And I think that it's the embodied nature of it. Even you and I right now are talking to each other. We're looking at each other on screens right now. We can talk to each other. We are connecting with each other right now. And yet the level of connection in an embodied state is vastly different. I mean, just last week you came into Denver, I picked you up from the airport, and just in that moment of saying, hey, welcome back, give a hug, jump in the car, the connection is so much more significant because it is embodied. It is happening in real time, in real life. This is happening in real time right now, but it's different. You can feel it. And I think all of us can feel it. And I don't think that we have to have any kind of, metaphysical understanding or understand. I don't think it has to go that deep, other than to say, yeah, we feel a difference when we're actually embodying the same space, as opposed to when we are working asynchronously at distance. And I think that's the miss of the water cooler, so to speak, the miss of the ability just to bump into somebody in the hallway, or even just, dedicate time to have a meal together. It changes things. It's not mysterious, I don't think. I think that you can maximize time when you're together. So I would say preference, yeah. I think it's better to be together. I would just outright declare, I think more gets done when you're together. I think the connection is deeper when you're together. And I also value the benefits. I mean, there are extreme benefits for us to be able to do things remotely. I mean, goodness gracious, we've just built a business for the last 5.5 years predominantly remotely. And I think it's It's cost savings. It takes a little bit of extra effort. I do think it takes a little bit of extra focus and horsepower mentally and emotionally to be fully present when you are in this kind of a space. But I think the values are significant, or the value is significant. And I think just like a lot of things in life, there's got to be some degree of a middle ground where you maximize the virtual workspace, but you also prioritize the embodied connection in the same kind of room space. And I think that there are ways that we can do that. And I think honestly, I think a lot of our partners do that quite well, even in some of the engagements that we have with them, because they prioritize and schedule. Often it's at least once a quarter. We're all going to be together. We're all going to be in the same room. We're all going to chop up the same content together. We're going to lean in, and then we can have a tail, so to speak. We kind of often call it a tail that will be more virtual, where we'll continue the connection, we'll continue the conversation, we'll continue the learning, we'll continue the application, but we also can do that with significant cost savings. And also give people the opportunity to continue to execute within their own space, within their own office, within their own territory, geography, all that kind of stuff. And so I think it's beneficial, certainly. I think we also all feel the difference when we are in the same space.
Yeah, this really struck me last week, and I agree. There's some sort of balanced mix of the two, ideally, if you can make it work. And it's not always the case for everybody, but last week when I was flying out to Denver, I'm on a plane and it was delayed and it was bumpy and just kind of one of those not great flying experiences. And, I think sometimes if you travel a lot for work and you're having an experience like that, it's not uncommon to say, like, what am I doing? Like, why am I doing this? I'm going to spend 3 days of my life to get out there and get back. And we're really only presenting for like 3 hours with this client. Like, it would be so much more efficient just to do this virtually, because then it could take 3 hours or 3.5 hours and like, that's it. But then, of course, we have the experience of spending some time together and meeting our friend Ben to go for a trail run, and then being in the room with these folks, having dinner with them after we wrapped up their last emerging leader program, module, and to spend that time together and to hear their stories and for them to express the gratitude for the program, both to us and to their sponsors. I mean, I flew back home feeling completely differently about it. And I think that is where we really need to be careful, because if you just sort of put it on a spreadsheet or lay it out very plainly, it's like, well, why would you spend 3 days of your life to do 3 hours worth of training? It's so much less efficient. But at the same time, I would say the connection that we have with these folks that we've seen once a quarter now for the past year is really tremendous. And I don't think we could have possibly gotten that had we only done it virtually. And so, yeah, I don't want to be on a plane every day or even every week, but the value, I don't think, can be overstated of sharing the room and sharing that same space with people. So, I go back and forth on it all the time, candidly, because I think about our business and I'm like, hey, we could do, virtual leadership development training 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. And like, the math looks really good on that. But I don't know that that training would be as valuable if we hadn't spent some time with some of these folks in person to begin with. And I feel it also from a customer's perspective. I think that's honestly where I feel it most these days. Is it's just sort of like, I feel like everywhere I turn, somebody is trying to automate or make impersonal something that used to be personal. And again, like, I went to business school. I understand the cost efficiencies and scale and all of that, but it's like, I can't help but think that as things become more and more automated and AI does more and more for us, that a lot of the businesses that really differentiate themselves will be the ones that figure out a way to have a meaningful personal connection with their customers. And I intend for us to be included in that lot.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, honestly, it's funny, we're having this conversation just the day after I was in the Apple store yesterday, because my MacBook, the camera quit out after 5.5 years. So I had this MacBook for 5.5 years, and it did a lot of good yeoman's work with us, right? It got me through grad school, helped us start our business, and we wrote a book on that Mac. So I have no love lost for it. It was a good soldier. It was a good piece of equipment. But I go in there, and the interesting thing is that before I went in, I tried to troubleshoot it. I called the Apple support. It was very nice. Very nice person helped me out. It just didn't work out. And I'm sitting there looking at this thing, and I'm like, okay, well, man, geez, like, how's this going to go down? Am I going to have to, you know, try to repair this thing? What's the cost going to be? And all that to say that so I go in there, I make an appointment and I go in there, and I'm in the Apple store for whatever, 15 minutes. And, Dustin, very nice gentleman, helps me out. And, he's like, okay, let me check this. Let me check this. Let's do this. He's kind of going back and forth, whatnot. And we're just kind of face to face. And he's like, hey man, like, here's the skinny, like it's shot. The camera's shot. You can basically replace it for X amount of dollars, or you can do a trade-in. We'll take this, we'll apply it towards a new purchase. I said, let's just go with the new purchase. I'm pretty pleased with a computer lasting me over 5 years. And he's like, cool, let me get you Trey. Trey comes over, and like, I was so impressed with this young man because he was so thoughtful, and it actually was quite refreshing, because in this experience face to face, he essentially sold me on a product that cost less money, because he's like, I just don't think you need all this. If you need all this from a MacBook Pro, then fine if you want to do it, but like, let's just talk about what you're using it for. Let's show me the things you're doing. Long story short is I had a delightful experience. I got the help that I needed. I got a new Mac. I was very pleased with the entire experience. And not only that, but as I'm kind of setting things up, and, you sign in with your iCloud and all this kind of stuff, I'm like stumped a couple times on things because I'm just not that tech savvy. But Dustin was right there. Trey was right there. They're like, hey, you need something? And you could see it. They could see that I was like stuck. And they would just wander back over in the midst of them doing their work and just be like, hey, let me help you out with that. Cool, thanks, man. The time that it took me to get set up, probably all told, we probably spent an hour there, right? It probably would have taken me 8 hours just on my own and searching things. And if I had to call something remote and all this kind of stuff, but it's like, that's just a simple example. And that's from a purchasing perspective, which is not necessarily where we started this conversation. But I feel like it's worth noting because I just had that experience, and I tried to do it remotely. I tried to talk to the support. Very nice people, radically different experience. I got the value I needed. They got the value out of me that they were looking for. Everybody won.
Yeah, efficiency is the funny word there, because you said you got done in an hour, what might have taken you 8 hours. And so the in-person experience in your case was more efficient. And there's a lot of different ways we could look at efficiency, from time or cost and all of those things. And I just think you have to be a little careful in how we do that, because it's easy to sort of lay it out on your whiteboard or a spreadsheet and say this would be more efficient, but you miss some of those things. Like, as an example, like, let's put it back in the work context. If I had the ability just to walk over to your office and ask you a quick question, that's probably going to be a lot more efficient than if I had to set up time to talk to you on your calendar and like, can I talk to your assistant? Like, it just seems massively inefficient. And not everything is like that, but there are certainly a number of ways in which all of these tools that have been built to increase efficiency and output are actually far less efficient than the kind of in real life version of that. And I think most people tend to get that. There's a lot of folks that say like, well, if you're in the office, you're wasting a lot of time just chatting or this and that. I have not found that to be the case, and maybe that's just based on where I've worked and the people I've worked with. But I have always found that if we can spend some time in the same room together, we're far more efficient and far more productive, which is really the right word, in moving things along. I will say maybe another way to think about this, though, is access to talent. I think this is a big argument for remote or distributed work that I hear a lot, is that, and we lived this when we were at Team RWB. We had a completely distributed workforce for the most part. And one of the things that did for us was it allowed us to kind of take the best player available, if you will, to put it like an NFL draft things. Like, we didn't have to go for somebody who was in Tampa or was in Denver or that kind of thing. we could cast a net around the entire country and say, if you're interested in this role, please apply, etc. And as a result, we were able to hire some really, really high performing people, because they were able to stay where they live. They didn't have to move. They didn't have to um, come into the office every day. They could have a little bit more flexible lifestyle. And that really worked out well for us. We did some things to try to help along that path, though, right? I mean, we got together at least once, usually twice a year as a team to do something that was meaningful. I know when I traveled, I was always trying to link up with teammates and spend time with them and do anything from grab a workout to a coffee. So we were pretty intentional about getting people together. We did all the regional leadership meetings where people would cluster together and get together. But I do understand this idea of kind of best available talent, even with our team right now. You're in Denver, I'm in Portland, Sarah's in New Orleans, Rebecca's down in Tampa. Like, we've got people kind of spread out. So I think that's one thing to really consider. I'm not sure how you think about that, but what's with this argument of like, hey, if you just get the best people, then you should be willing to kind of do the distributed thing?
I think it depends. I mean, it's also worth noting that we required regional directors to be in their regions. You couldn't be, a kick-ass talent prospect in San Francisco and lead the Mid-Atlantic. You needed to be in the Mid-Atlantic. And so, we had guys like, Brendan Mullaney that was in the Mid-Atlantic. We had guys like Garrett Cathcart who were in the Southeast. And, you had Zach Armstrong, that was up in the Midwest. It mattered. It definitely matters to have some of that geographic dispersion, I think. But I think it's also role dependent, right? Maybe in more of a technical role, such as a marketing and communications role, it might feel a little bit different. If you're an inside sales representative, it might be a little bit different. If you're doing finance, for example, a little bit different, right? When you're a little more, I don't know, client facing, maybe, if you want to call it that, or if you're more, if you're running operations in a certain geography that are significant to that geography, i.e. running a region of a veteran serving nonprofit that is trying to connect people to their communities, it's, I think, a bit of a non-starter to say, well, heck, I can live wherever I want. I mean, for me, when I was in that role, I was a director of development. And so most of my contacts were national. Kind of didn't really matter where I was, right? I was in Denver, but I was flying all over the place. A little bit less so when I think that I think you need to be in the dirt if you're trying to make an impact in the dirt.
Yeah. I think the nature of the business matters a great deal here too. And I feel like for a lot of years, software and technology really kind of set the pace for a lot of this conversation. And it was like, look what we can do, in this super lean, distributed manner. And I think we learned a lot and have benefited a lot from that. But I think in many ways, we've bumped up against the, kind of the extent of usefulness for some of these methodologies. And I think some businesses are realizing like we can't quite do it that way because our business doesn't function quite that way. I'll give you an example. My friend Jack down in Tampa works for JP Morgan Chase, who has kind of famously or infamously brought everybody back to the office 5 days a week,
right,
period. And I had coffee with him recently when I was down there, and he said, we want to come to the office. It makes perfect sense for us because we have kind of a team approach to private banking and wealth management and all of these things. And it's a full contact sport because you have to be out there, prospecting and getting clients on the books. You've got to be there for clients when they're stressed, when they're going through life events. And when there's a lot of turmoil in the markets the way they are now, having the team approach and having everybody right there in the office makes a huge difference in terms of their ability to create the right solutions for their clients in terms of wealth management, tax planning, et cetera, that he just doesn't think that you could do with that level of kind of personal concierge service. Mm-hmm. If you're not in the office. You may even need to meet your clients in the office, which lifts a level of credibility for them to come on into the office, come in, let's sit down, let's talk about this, because this is a big deal for you and your family. And
you don't want them just to come to your basement.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so in that setting, even though you technically could do a lot of that work from a laptop or workstation at your home, it just seems to work a lot better for the client they're trying to serve by being in the office. And I think, look, if that makes sense for their business, I'm all for it. So I think that's another thing for us to really take into account is just there are really no blanket statements about these things. We've really got to think hard about the nature of our business, the nature of our customers, the nature of our people, and what we're trying to do, and come up with a solution that actually makes sense for us. Because I think we're going to struggle if we just sort of take some sort of solution or ethos off the shelf and say, like, this is the way to do it.
Yeah, I think so. And you've got me thinking about being in office. Most of my career outside of the United States Army, I have mostly worked remote. But there have been about 3 of the 16 years that I worked in an office setting. And what's interesting to me is, so I'm a pretty clear extrovert, right? So I get a lot of energy when I interact with other people in person, right? And you could, like, when you talk about our business, yeah, we could do 6 virtuals a day. I would be completely wiped out. But I will tell you that, when I spend 4 hours in a boardroom with people that are just really getting after it, I mean, yeah, we leave it all out on the field and everything, and there's an exhaustion, but I feel so uplifted and full of life when I'm in person with people, so much more than when I'm in a virtual setting. It's not that I don't feel, that connection and great about it, but there is a significant difference. I will say that in my couple years of working in an office setting outside of the Army, something that I noticed was that I did kind of have a difficult time not connecting and talking with people that were there and available. And so I had to really watch myself in terms of being able to kind of like shut myself off a little bit, or shut the office door, which I hated that. Like, I hated the idea of shutting my door, to somebody else or to anybody. But there were times that I would have to do that, and I would have to moderate that a little bit. And in fact, in one of my previous settings, we had an executive assistant who was just like lights out fantastic. And sometimes she would pop by and just say, "Hey, do you want me to shut the door to your office? Because I know you've got some pretty big projects that you're working on." I'm like, "Oh my gosh, thank you so much." It was like she gave me permission to do it, because otherwise it was really easy for me just to walk out. We had kind of like a little bit of she was in the middle of like 4 offices, and she was a shared teammate, and it was just so easy to walk out and be like, "Hey," or somebody pop by, "Hey, what do you?" It was hard for me to focus in that regard. And so I don't want to discount the fact that there are pluses and minuses with this whole thing, no matter which way you cut it. And one of the reasons that I am in this very small and sequestered office in my basement is because it affords me the ability to shut the door and focus. And I do need that. And so it's not without its ups and downs. I just wanted to note that.
Yeah, for sure. And every personality is going to be a little different in that regard too, right? Some people are, it's much more stressful for them to be around people and to have to interact. And some people feel really flat unless they have the opportunity to be around people and interact. I think you and I are both in different ways, kind of in the middle there, where like I need time just to focus and concentrate, but I also get really run down by the end of the day where I haven't had much interpersonal interaction. So I think we're always trying to figure out ways to make this work for ourselves. And for me, sometimes that includes just grabbing my laptop and going down to a coffee shop or something, just to have some energy around me while I'm doing emails or writing something, or something that's not going to be like a client interaction or being on calls and stuff like that. It really is dependent on the person in a lot of cases. I saw this really funny meme one time, and it was a picture of a guy, like, I think he was like backpacking or hiking, and it said, "I've had 20-mile days that were not as exhausting as that 30 minutes Teams call." And I was like, brother, I feel you.
Yeah, 100%. That's such a good point. And I mean, even when you were in Tampa, like rented space at a shared workspace, because
I did.
That was more effective for you. And so I think, we've kind of stumbled into this, but it's worth noting that, look, if you are working in a remote setting, it's worth exploring what tactics or techniques help you to be most effective, most full, what will give you the most energy in the midst of your day. And that's one of the techniques I think is really helpful is, for me, like I didn't need a shared office space. This works very well for me, but I will tell you right now that I could be working here. I might be working upstairs on the couch. I might be working some in the office on the, third floor, or where, our ensuite where Kelly does her studying. I have to move around a little bit. I might be out back on my deck, and that's okay. Find out what works best for you. I think if you are working in this kind of, virtual or integrated or hybrid setting, which is, I feel like what we do is very hybrid because we travel so much.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned a couple of words that I think I want to make sure we get out before we wrap up. Fulfillment and productivity are really ultimately what it's about, because you have to produce, you have to be effective. At some point, it's less about the setting or how it all gets done. We still have to do the work that we've been assigned to do at a really high level if we want to be successful. And that comes in lots of shapes and sizes. So efficiency is not really what we're always going for. It's productivity, it's effectiveness. And it's the same on a personal level. If we're unfulfilled or totally drained and exhausted by the environment or the nature of our work, we've got to figure out ways to do it a little bit differently or better for us, because that's a road to burnout and we're not going to have good results there either. So we can't just look at it like, well, look at, I save all this commute time. Sure, like that's a real thing. We have to take that into consideration. But for you, is there value in being able to leave your home and go to work and then leave your work and go home?
I'm
For
so
some people,
glad you
that's not a
said
big
that.
deal. For a lot of people, that is a big deal,
Yeah.
right? And so you can't just math your way to an answer on this. These are very human questions. And I think, maybe the last thing I'll say, Brandon, is that I think that if you're doing this both as an individual or as a leader of a business, whatever approach you decide to take, you need to be very thoughtful about this approach and make it work for you and your people, such that you can be both productive and fulfilled in what you're trying to do to the greatest extent possible, and be open to whatever arrangement's going to work to make that happen. Because to say it's good or bad, that's a fool's errand. We can't get there.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that I would, my last thought on this is that I would just suggest that if you are a leader that has a bit of a distributed workforce, there is a lot of wisdom in budgeting time, allocating resources to make sure that you are putting connection events, meetings in place throughout the year. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. I think working in the remote environment, even when we were, as you mentioned, with a nonprofit where, look, nonprofits can be tough, resources can be thin, we still budgeted in the resources and the time to make sure that we were able to connect. It matters. I would just say that it matters.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is fun. I think we could go on forever about this. I'm just thinking right now, I have a lot more actually probably to say about this, but maybe we can revisit or do a round two, or frame the question slightly differently next time. But I hope this is helpful. I've just a bit of a thinking out loud session, I think, which, sometimes are the best ones to listen to. If you have questions out there, we would love to
Mhm.
hear them. So please send any questions to contact@appliedleadershippartners.com. We'll check them all out. We'll get as many of them on the podcast as we can. We always appreciate hearing from you. And so with that, we'll wrap it up, and we'll see you guys next time.